I am ate up to the core with whitetails. I always have been, always will be. It's probably the most sought after game animal in the world. We've got some really monumental stories as far as we're concerned. Try and see if you can get as excited about them as we were. As you go on around the line, I mean, there's stories with every single one of them. Some are so unique, and you don't forget any of them, but every single one of these deer in here have a story, and we want to share it with everybody, but it would take too long to try and share every story. When you sit back and look at them and you think about it, you go, man, oh man, we've spent a lot of time, but boy, has it been a good ride. Here's a little tidbit that not many people know. This was the first shed we found on my farm. And that's no joke, I'm not making that up. That was in March of '04. You know how hard that is to find that shed? The old adage, once a spike, always a spike, that doesn't ring true because they grow, if you give them time, to get to 6.5, 7.5, 8.5 years old, then you never know what they're gonna blow into. As we take those trips down memory lane, I've got just a couple of deer within the confines of this room that I kind of would love to share the story. One of them starts with a deer way back in 2004, and oddly enough, he just happens to be right here in the room. This is a deer that at the time I was just taken aback by it, and we knew the animal. We had trail camera footage of him. We had wildlife eye footage of him. I went in the day before and hung the set, really close to a scrape. We said, you know what, if this front clears out, then by golly, there's a really good chance these deer are gonna be up on their feet and moving. It was cold, it was misty, it was rainy. I mean, it was all of those things that you love to feel when you're a bow hunter. That's the weather conditions you want. And we got wet. I mean, we were soaked on the way in there, but it didn't matter. We were walking at an extremely quick pace to get to the spot, climb up in that particular set. There were already deer on the field, and we fortunately got up there and got into position without bumping those deer off the field. I mean, we weren't in the stand very long at all. All of a sudden, he pops out. We see a glimpse of him, see those antlers just barely start to peek out. And at that point, I was like, oh my God, this thing is a giant. It was a really heavy, solid deer, beautiful white rack, big, tall tines. That's when your heart starts. Really gets to pumping. Then you go into this game time mode and you go, okay, let's slow it down just a little bit. Well, it's easier said than done when you've got a giant deer out there in front of you trying to slow your breathing down and your heart's beating 90-0. We had situated that stand where once they got onto the food, they were in our roundhouse. After we drew the bow and then put the shot on him, at that point, you feel pretty good, but you're never ever 100% sure or certain until you wrap your hands around those antlers. So we said, you know what, safe than sorry, let's go back, watch the video, put it up on the monitor. That's exactly what we did. We went back to camp. Mark's sitting there, he goes, go get him, he's dead. And I will tell you, it was the largest deer of my career at that time. There was a lot of hugging and high-fiving, and it was a great feeling. That was a really special moment for me and a memory that I will never ever forget. Okay, we just stepped into another room here. This is kind of a catch-all, if you will. If you're working on a project and you need some tools, you come in here and you hope you got them. This is just odds and ends, whether you're gonna be working on a bow or working on a firearms or whatever it may be. A lot of it happens right in here. I needed the space and needed a place to put some of the other racks, and we thought, what a great spot to put them. So it's fun to look at these and think about those hunts as well. These stories are just as important. I could go on and on and on. Here's a deer that I hunted for 60 days in a row and finally got him on the ground. And to give you an idea, I know when people watch some of our stuff, they think that there's a big deer behind every rock, every tree. It doesn't work like that. Oftentimes, we got to hunt day in and day out, day in and day out. Well, you get to day 59 and you haven't killed a deer, it's a different feeling. So that was on day 60. I remember that one vividly. There's a memory really with every one of these mounts that's in this room, but a couple of them stood out. I have another one here, a deer that we had nicknamed Chris. A buddy of ours, Chris Comstock, and they had an encounter with him the year before, and we didn't have him named, so we named him Chris. At that time, we knew he was a pretty good animal. He was 4.5 or 5.5 years old, and we didn't get him killed that year, but we said, you know what, next year he may blow into a giant, and that's exactly what he did. He blew into an absolute stud. Even the neighbors all had pictures of him. They were talking about him, calling us, wanting to know if we'd seen him. Hadn't seen either hair of him. So the chess match began. We went through that early season with the archery with bow, or didn't get him on the ground. He said, you know what? Firearm season is upon us. All we need is some good weather, and maybe he'll show his face. We hung in there and said, you know what, let's continue to hunt because the conditions were right. It was a really, really cold snap for opening day of Missouri's Firearms, maybe one of the coldest that I remember, and they were calling for 1 to 4 inches of snow later in the day. We continued sitting in the blind there, and all of a sudden, we see these giant antlers that are kind of back in the brush and in the timber. You could see a few does back there nudging around. He just kind of melted off into the brush. They're in your life and out of your life, and then you may or may not ever see them again. I had my mind made up. I was gonna sit there for the entire season because I had a lot of history with him. He's dogging and nudging those does around. Here he comes. A doe drug him out of the brush, out of that thick timber, and onto the field. We knew it was now or never. Getting the window open is always scary, but we were able to get the crosshairs on him, put the shot on him, and he didn't run maybe 70 yards. It was starting to snow, so we said, let's go get him before we lose the blood trail, before he's covered up. And I mean, it came down. All of a sudden, the snow just started falling. I just love snowy hunts. It was so memorable for me because I had a high school buddy by the name of Mike Joggers that was there filming the hunt. Not only did Matt kill his deer, but Mike and I got to share that hunt together. The snow falling, it just was tranquil and just a great feeling. One of the things that we are and will forever be is thankful and grateful that we get the opportunity. You know, it's about conservation and it's about, you know, managing your deer herd and all of those things that go into it, all the time and effort and blood, sweat, and tears. And I was extremely thankful for both the deer in Iowa and Chris there in Missouri, and thankful that Matt was able to harvest a deer as well. But it was just one of those whitetails in this particular room that created memories for me that I will never forget.